Alrighty, hello everybody. Roy Fry here with Reformed and Recovered. Doing a Saturday morning edition for you guys. Gonna be knocking out the ninth part of the Recovery and the Puritan video series. I think this will be the second to last video. I'm gonna kill it at number 10, and then maybe start working on doing some more original content. This series has really been reading through different Puritan authors in this book that getting ready to release, Life on God's Terms, Recovery and the Puritans, where Derek Hogan and I, or D. Hogan Moore and I, read through a bunch of Puritan books and pulled out ideas and thoughts and quotes that we thought were good for the modern recovery circles. And it's kind of funny because before I even met him, I wanted to do this project. And I knew that I wanted to do it with somebody. And then he ended up reaching out to Reformed and Recovered through Facebook. And we were talking on the phone one night. And I don't remember how we came on the subject, but we both mentioned that we thought that the Puritans were good for people in recovery. And that's where the project finally really kind of grew out of those conversations right there. So I'm getting ready to release it here in a few months. I'm still making edits. And that's kind of been what this series has been too, is going through and reading the material loud, make sure it flows good and all that. But also I'm highlighting areas that I need to adjust, highlighting areas that we need to edit, like grammar, weird sentences, also taking out some of the outdated language. The Puritans were from many hundreds of years ago, so they use different language than we do. So taking some of that out, trying to swap in modern terms to understand the meaning of the text a little bit. So covered a lot of different subjects. I've done contentment, love and service, seeking satisfaction in Christ, done self-examination, and what I called the active mercy of Christ, the idea that Christ is working on us, he's changing us, he's transforming us to conform to the image of his Son. We could call that sanctification if we wanted to, but I chose to use the term the active mercy of Christ. And then I read through a sermon and made remarks from Thomas Boston on the Ten Commandments. That was 2 videos. And today, we're going to start John Flavel on what I'm calling John Flavel on alcohol abuse. This is a sermon that, again, Derek and I had read before we even met each other, and we knew that we wanted to publish it. We knew that it needed to be republished in some form, just to make it more available for people. And I think it was Banner of Truth that had already done this series called the Pocket Puritan, but they had made a bunch of edits to it. So we wanted to publish the sermon in its original form, as true as we could to the original form. So Derek took the time to transcribe it. So that's what we're going to go over here. So if you failed to see how any of this has to do with recovery, which I think if you're in tune with recovery and you're in tune with theology to some degree, I don't think you should have a trouble of seeing why this series exists. But today, John Flavel on alcohol abuse, right? If you're an AA or like me, if you're a recovering alcoholic like me, well, you understand the concept of alcohol abuse. And this was originally published in 1820. So it's published almost 100 years, 80 years before the publishing of Alcoholics Anonymous book. But you're going to notice that there's some languages and some images here that I think you'll recognize and you'll easily identify with. And this just proves that truth is truth regardless of where we're pulling that truth from, right? It might not be in our particular language or our particular lingo or our jargon, or even, for lack of a better term, it might not be the paradigm or the system of recovery that we identify with, but the truth, it's the principles that matter. And that's what this is. It's a celebration of spiritual principles, and that's what we want to rally around in Alcoholics Anonymous, in Reformed and Recovery. It's not so much a paradigm, it's not so much a system of recovery, but to rally around the principles, because the principles are universal. So here we go, John Flavel on the sin of alcohol abuse. And this is Proverbs 23, 29 to 32, opening text. Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has strife? Who has complaints? Who has needless bruises? Who has bloodshot eyes? Those who linger over wine, who go to sample bowl of mixed wine. Do not gaze at wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it goes down smoothly. In the end, it bites like a snake and poisons like a viper. Now I got a quote from his sermon. Beware of the detestation of drunkenness, which is a beastly sin, an involuntary madness, a sin that unmans thee and makes thee like the beasts that perish. Beware of the sin of drunkenness, which is a beastly sin, an involuntary madness, a sin that unmans thee and makes thee like the beasts that perish. That's good right there. Let me make one edit. All right, here's my little blurb, then I'll start reading it to you. So since man first squashed the grape, right, AA, you're familiar with that, humanity has had issues with alcohol abuse. And I have a reference there, Genesis 9, 20 to 21. That's the story of Noah. That's the first explicit mention of drunkenness in the Bible. We could probably assume there was some of that before the flood, but this is the first explicit mention of drunkenness. So since man first squashed the grape, humanity has had issues with alcohol abuse. As a result, man has had to develop many different methods to combat its negative effects on society. The Puritans were no strangers to this. The following sermon, originally written by John Flavel for a group of seamen, that's what's interesting, it was written for a bunch of sailors, is one such example of the Puritan effort to combat drunkenness in their era. Although it was composed hundreds of years before the modern recovery movement began, it contains ideas, concepts, and language which members of the recovery circles will easily identify with. All right, I got another opening quote for you guys, Ephesians 5:18, which is one of my favorite verses when it comes to all this. Do not get drunk on wine, which leads to debauchery. Instead, be filled with the Spirit. And I feel like that's a very underrated verse in Christian recovery. All right, here's Flavel. I'm going to go through a couple pages. I think it's about 12 pages. I won't read it all today. We'll kill this around 25 minutes or so and pick it up at another time. In the former treatise, I've endeavored to spiritualize earthly objects and elevate your thoughts to more sublime and excellent contemplations, that earthly things may rather be a step than a stop to heaven. You have there my advice to guide you in your course to that port of your eternal rest and happiness. And he's referring to his book, Navigation Spiritualized, A New Compass for Seamen, right? And that's this book that this sermon comes from. It was a book of sermons written for sailors. In this I have given warnings of some dangerous rocks and quicksand that lie upon your left hand, upon which millions of souls have perished, and others are willfully cunning to their own perdition. Such are the horrid sins of drunkenness, uncleanness, profane swearing, violation of promises, engagements made to God, and atheistic sliding and contempt of death and eternity. All which I have here given warning of, and held forth a light to discover where your danger is. If after this you obstinately deny your lusts and will not be reclaimed, you will perish without apology. I have freed mine own soul. Let none interpret this necessary plainness as a reproach to seamen, as if I represented them to the world worse than they are. If, upon that account, any of them be offended, methinks these 3 or 4 considerations should remove that offense. So he's not trying to offend the seamen. He said that they're all drunkards or whatever, but he's trying to warn them about the evils and about the dangers of drunkenness. First, that this close and plain dealing is necessary for your cure. So he's trying to help them. He's trying to help them recover. And you will be offended here. It is better you should be offended than God. Ministers are often put upon lamentable straits. They sail between Scylla and Charybdis. That's from, I think that's from the Odyssey. The wrath of God upon one side, if we do not speak plain and home, as the necessity of the case requires, and man's wrath if we do. What shall we do in this strait? Either God or you, it seems, must be offended. And if it cannot be avoided, I shall rather hazard your anger than God's, and think it more tolerable, right? So he'd rather offend men, he'd rather offend a few people than fail his duty to warn about the dangers of sin. Iced coffee, there we go. Secondly, if you do not see the necessity end of this manner of dealing with your souls, you would not be offended. That's a good point. If it wasn't hitting home, you wouldn't be offended. But put into a more sensible case, and you will see and acknowledge it presently. If I should see a high-built wall giving way and ready to fall upon you, would you be angry with me if by plucking you out of the danger, I should pluck your arm out of joint? Certainly you would not. Why? This is the case here. And then he quotes Isaiah 30:13. Therefore, this iniquity shall be to you as a breach ready to fall, swelling out in a high wall, whose breaking cometh suddenly at an instant. Thirdly, what a madness it is to abide in a condition over which all woes and curses hang, and yet not be able to endure the hear of it. Why? What will it profit you to have your misery hid from your eyes, kept from your ears for a little while? You must see this wrath and hear louder woes from your own consciences, if you remain in this condition. You cannot bear that from us, which your conscience will one of these days preach themselves to you, and that in a more dreadful dialect than I have used here. So he's basically saying that, look, my warnings about the sin of drunkenness, right? They're going to be far softer than your own conscience, and the negative results of you remaining in this sin are going to be. I'm warning you, I'm going to use tough language. But guess what? The reality of your drunken condition, it's going to get you, it's going to convince you, it's going to hurt you and harm you way more than anything I might say right now. Fourthly, I do not charge these sins indifferently upon all seamen. So he's not saying all seamen are drunkards. No, I know there is some choice and good men among you that fear an oath and hate even the garments spotted with the flesh, who are, I question not, the credit and the glory of our English nation in the eyes of strangers that converse with them. Nor yet do I think that all are wicked amongst them that are equally guilty of all these evil. For though all that are graceless be equally under the dominion of original sin, yet it follows not from thence that therefore actual sins must reign alike in them. So it means we struggle with different things. There's a great difference even among ungodly men themselves in this respect, which difference arises from their various customs, constitutions, abilities, education, and the different administrations of the Spirit in enlightening, convincing, and putting checks upon conscience. For though God be not the author, yet he is the orderer of sin. And this makes a great disparity even among wicked men themselves. Some are persons of good morals, though not gracious principles, which produce a civil and sober, though not a holy and religious life. And others, though they live in some of these lusts, yet are not guilty as some others of them. For it is with original corruption, just as it is with the sap of the earth, which though it be the matter of all kinds of fruits, yet in some ground it sorts better with one grain than with another, and some in plants, in one tree it becomes an apple, and another a cherry. Even so it is with the original corruption. In one man it runs most into drunkenness, right? So our sin nature makes us inclined to sin, but we don't all commit the same sins. We don't all, we're not all drawn to commit the same sins. Obviously, those of us that have a past with drunkenness, well, we were drawn to commit the sin of drunkenness. But not everyone's a drunkard. Not everyone abuses alcohol. Some of us did because we were inclined to commit that sin. That's just like to say not all of us rob banks, but some people have been condemned to rob, have been inspired to rob banks. It's sin expressing itself in our lives different ways. Okay. Lust is nothing else but the corrupt appetite of the nature to some sinful object. And therefore, look as it is with the appetite with respect to food, so it is with the appetites of souls to sin. One man loves this food best and the other that. There's endless variety in that, and so in this, right? So we all sin differently. We have sin, but we all have this sin nature, but it expresses itself differently. Having spoken thus much to remove offense, I shall now beg you to pursue the following discourse. Consider what evidence these things carry with them. Search the scriptures. See if they truly are applied to the case in hand. And so, O tremble at the truth you read, and bring forth your lust that they may die the death. Will you not part with these abominable practices till death and hell make the separation? Ah, how much better is it for you that grace should do it? And because many of you see not the danger and therefore prize not the remedy, I do here request all those that have the bowels of pity in them for their poor relations, who are sinking, drowning, periling, to spread these following cautions before the Lord for a blessing, and then put them in their hands. And oh, that all pious masters would persuade all those that are under their charge to buy this ensuing treatise and diligently pursue it. And the first caution I shall give is this. So here's caution number 1. And then he launches into a bunch of different arguments. Take heed. Beware of the detestable sin of drunkenness, which is a beastly sin, a voluntary madness, a sin that summons thee, and makes thee like the beasts that perish. Yea, sets thee below the beasts, which will not drink to excess. Or if they do, yet it is not their sin. One of the ancients calls it a distemper of the head, a subversion of the senses, a tempest in the tongue, a storm of the body, the shipwreck of virtue, the loss of time, a vile madness, a pleasant devil, a sugared poison, a sweet sin, which he that has not himself, and he that commits it doth not only commit sin, but he himself altogether sin. Wow, that's a heavy quote. It is a sin which the most sober heathen blush. The Spartans brought their children to loathe it by showing them a drunkard, whom they gazed at as a monster. Even Epicurus himself, who esteemed happiness to consist in pleasure, yet was temperate, as Cicero observes. And those are, ancient names, and Cicero being a historian of some sort. Among the heathens, he was accounted the best man, that spent more oil in the lamp than wine in the bottle. Christianity should once glory in its professors. Tertullian, that's a very, very, very famous church theologian from many years ago, saith of the primitive Christians, they sat down not before they prayed. They sat down not before they prayed. They ate no more than might suffice hunger, then drank no more than was sufficient for temperate men. They did so eat and drink, as those that remember they may pray afterward. But now we may blush to behold such beastly sensuality, adorning themselves with its name, and sheltering themselves under its wings. And it does. It affects all classes. It's not just Christians or non-Christians. It's Christians and non-Christians alike are guilty of committing this sin of drunkenness. And amongst those that profess Christianity, how ordinarily is this sin committed by sailors or seamen? This insatiable dropsy is a disease that reigns, especially among the inferior and ruder sort of them. Some of them have gone aboard drunk and laid the foundation of their voyage in sin. They know not whether they will see the land of their nativity anymore, the land of their birth anymore. The next storm may send them into eternity. Yet this is the farewell they take. This is their preparation to meet the Lord. It means they get real drunk before they go on the boat. And so in their returns, notwithstanding the terrible and astonishing works of the Lord, which they have beheld with their eyes, and their marvelous preservation and so great and terrible extremities. Yet this do they require the Lord, as soon as their dangers have passed, if they had delivered to commit all their abomination. But a few hours or days since, they are reeling to and fro upon a stormy ocean, and staggering like drunken men, as it is said in Psalm 107:27. And now may see them reeling and staggering in the streets, drowning the sense of their precious mercies and deliverances in their drunken cups. Reader, if you be one that is guilty of this sin, for the Lord's sake, bethink thyself speedily, and weigh with the reason of man what I shall now say, in order to thy conviction, humiliation, and reformation. I need not spread many words to open the nature of this sin to you. We all grant that there is awful use of wine and strong drink to support nature, not to clog it, to cure infirmities, not to cause them, right? So he's saying that all drinking is bad. Like, and he'll quote 1 Timothy 5:23, drink no longer water, but use a little wine for thy stomach's sake and thine own infirmity, right? So it has medicinal purposes. And not all drinking is bad. Obviously, he's not making that point. And Reformed and Recovered doesn't make that point either. Yea, God allows its temperate use, and that's what the Bible promotes, is temperate use, a sober use of alcohol. Obviously, alcoholics should never attempt that, and drug addicts should never attempt that. But if you're not an addict, you're not an alcoholic, the Bible has no issues with a temperate, sober use of alcohol. God allows temperate use, not only for bare necessity, but for cheerfulness, that the body may more fit and more expedite for duty. But further, no man may proceed without the violation of sobriety, right? So he's saying, sure, have a glass, if you don't struggle with this, have a glass here and there. There's nothing wrong with that. Have a glass with have a glass with dinner, have a glass with your friends, but don't fall into drunkenness. Don't fall into drunkenness. When men sit still, wine inflames them, and reason be disturbed. Okay? Drunkenness is the privation or the depriving of reason caused by immoderate drinking. Then do they come under the guilt of this horrible and abominable sin? To the satisfaction and refreshment of nature you may drink, or is it a part of the curse to drink and not be satisfied? Something said there. Or is it part of the curse to drink and not be satisfied? One is too many, and 1,000 is not enough. Because alcohol can never satisfy. Drugs can never satisfy. Only God can satisfy. Only Christ can satisfy. Alcohol and drugs, those are attempts to seek satisfaction outside of Christ, and they're failed attempts. But take heed and go no further. For wine is a mocker, strong drink is raging, and whoever is deprived thereby is not wise. That's Proverbs 21. I've treated that in my video on the sin of drunkenness. I've also treated those in the the Bible-based recovery series. I think it was a video 4 or 5. You can go through the video library and see that when I treat a bunch of different passages to look at what the Bible says about compulsive behaviors. The throat is a slippery place. How easily may a sin slip through it into the soul? These sensual pleasures have a kind of enchanting power upon the soul, and by custom gain upon, until they have enslaved it and brought it under their power. Now this is the sin against which God hath delivered so many precepts and denounced so many woes in his word. Quote, be not drunk with wine, wherein is excess. Okay, that's Ephesians 5:18. Romans 13:13. Quote, not in rioting and drunkenness, not in chambering and wantonness. And I treated that in the Recovery and Special Grace, which I believe was like video maybe 12 in the Bible-based recovery series, and I deal with Romans 13. It also quotes Isaiah 5:11. Woe to them that rise up early in the morning, that they may follow strong drink, and that continue until night, until wine inflame them. End quote. With many other dreadful descriptions. Now to startle thee forever from this abominable and filthy lust, I shall here propound to thy consideration these 10 ensuing arguments. Oh, that they may stand in the way, as the angel did to Balaam, when thou art in the prosecution of these sensual pleasures. And the first is this. I'll finish this one argument, and then we'll pick it up next time, and we'll go through Yeah, which is about 7 pages. So hello to whoever was watching, or whoever has been watching. I see some people popping on. Argument 1. It should exceedingly dissuade from his sin to consider that it is a high abuse of the bounty and goodness of God in affording us those sweet refreshments to make our lives comfortable upon this earth. Right, so that drunkenness is an abuse of a gift. God gives wine to make the heart of man merry. That's a gift from God. But drunkenness is an abuse of that gift. I talk about that in Psalms 4. I'll go over that a little bit. Because it's to seek satisfaction in the gift and not the giver. In Adam, we forfeited all right to all earthly as well as heavenly mercies. God might have taken thee from the womb when thou was a sinner, but of a span long, and immediately has sent thee to thine own place. Right? He could have. Because we were born in sin, God could have punished us. Though has no right and no water more than the bounty of God given thee, and he has given us grace upon grace, special if you're saved, common if you're not, if you don't know Christ. And whereas he might have thrust thee out of the world as soon as thou came into it. And so all these days of mercy thou hast had on earth might have been spent in howling and unspeakable misery in hell. Behold the bounty and goodness of God to thee. I say, behold it, and wonder how he had suffered thee for so many years to live upon the earth, which he has prepared and furnished for thy necessity and delight. Out of the earth on which you tread, he bringeth forth thy food and wine to make thee glad. That's Psalm 104, 14 and 15. Right? And that's where that is, or to make the hearts of man merry, however the translation of it is. And dost thou requite the Lord? Do you deny the Lord? Hath mercy armed the enemy to fight against it with weapons? That ever the riches of his goodness, bounty, and long-suffering, all which are arguments to lead thee to repentance, should be this abused. If God had not been so bountiful, thou could not have been so sinful. And basically because God has given you mercy and allowed you to live, well, we've continued to sin. Unfortunately, we've continued to sin. But if God hadn't given us this mercy, if he would have just put us away, well, we would have had less time on earth, obviously, to delight in the good things, but we would have had less time to abuse the things of God. It's kind of a weird argument, but he makes it nonetheless. And here's argument 2, and I'll cut it after this. It degrades man from the honor of his creation, equalizes him to the beast that perishes. Wine is said to take away the heart, Hosea 4:11. So it takes away the ingenuity of man, the wisdom of man, and it brutalizes him as Nebuchadnezzar, who lost his heart of man and had a heart of beast given to him. And in the book of Daniel, it talks about how King Nebuchadnezzar wandered around in the wilderness and acting like an animal. So that's the image is given there. And you can see that in Daniel 4:32. The heart of man has its generosity and sprightliness, brave, vigorous spirits in it, capable of and fitted for noble and worthy actions and employments. It means our heart, we've been created good. We are not bad creations. But our lust, it destroys him. It quenches and drowns the vigor in the puddle of excess and sensuality. But because of sin, we abuse the gifts. We abuse the good things of God. For no sooner is a man brought under the dominion of his lust, but the government of reason is renounced, which would exercise a coercive power over the affections, and all is delivered up into the hands of lust and appetite, and so they act by discretion and reason, but by lust and will, as the beasts do by instinct. The spirit of man entertains itself with intellectual and chaste delights. The soul of a beast is only fit for such low, sensitive, and draggy pleasures. Thou hast something of the angel and something of the beast in the field. Thy soul partakes of the nature of angels, thy body of the nature of beasts. Oh, how many pamper the beast while they starve the angel. God, in the first chapter of all the creatures in subjection to thee, by this lest thou put thyself into subjection to the creature, and art rough under its power. If God had given thee the head or the feet of a beast, oh, what a misery wouldst thou have esteemed it. And is it nothing to have the heart of a beast? Oh, consider it and sadly. That we should abstain from drunkenness because it takes away our reason. It causes us to act out. It causes us to do things that we never would have done. And it reduces us to kind of a beastly state. Really, it reduces us to a beastly state. All right, we're going to end it at argument 3, and we'll pick this up at another time. Yeah, hope you guys all have a good day. Have a good weekend. And I'll catch you guys around. I love you. Have a good one.